a question. So here's my question for you guys, because I'd like to know where you're coming from. What do you find most challenging when it comes to organic chemistry, particularly when you're trying to revise it? You know, what are the difficulties? What is it that made you sign up for a class in the middle of Easter, thinking about what are you hoping to get to help you? And you can either send that message in the chat directly to me, or you can just send it so that everything. Oh, yes. Okay. Already we've got some stuff about remembering. Big one. Mechanisms. Oh, lots on ozone. Interesting. I'm actually doing a video on ozone next week, so look out for that one. Knowing reagents, ways to remember, conditions, synthetic routes, which mechanisms go with which functional groups. Some really, really, really good answers here. Halogens with sulfuric acid, I reckon that's probably inorganic chemistry, but it's still remembering stuff. So there's definitely common things going on here, and it's really common for everyone that there is so much to remember that we need to have really effective techniques to get it down. So what we're going to cover today, and feel free to keep putting some stuff in there if you remember some other stuff that you find difficult. We're going to look at like those common difficulties and maybe some of the mistakes we're doing in our revision, which mean that we're coming up with those difficulties. Not that it's that you are making mistakes, because actually, you know, it's just difficult. It's chemistry, it's hard. We're going to look at retrieval practice, so really concentrating on that memory thing, how we get more effective ways to remember stuff, a lot of stuff. And I'm going to give you some prompts that you can use when you're going through your organic chemistry to, again, help with remembering, linking things together, because a lot of you are saying, well, I don't know which mechanism it is, or I don't know how to link reaction routes together. We're going to look at how we use past paper questions, because we do, but tomorrow's focus is going to be on exam technique. So we're not going to do too much on exam technique today. And we're going to look at, you know, how we actually plan, because part of the memory thing is giving ourselves enough time. So effectively planning our revision between now and the big day, so that we actually, you know, get it all in time. Okay, so let's look at some common mistakes. You probably aren't making all of them, and that's because two of them are almost opposite. So you could put yourself on a scale of what sort of student you are when it comes to revision. Okay, so common mistakes. Obviously, this is an obvious one. Too little, too late. We always feel like we're doing this, especially with A-levels, because they're really, really busy and there's loads to do. If you're coming along now and thinking, I can't remember any organic chemistry, and now I'm feeling like I've left it really late, you haven't, but today's the day that you start and getting on top of it. So it's not too late. If it was 15th of May, maybe we are leaving it quite late to learn all of the organic chemistry there is, but it's not too late yet. But obviously, the longer we leave it, and we can do that because it's scary, so we start to procrastinate. So we need to avoid that and just get on top of it. The other one, though, which I see almost more than I see the too little, too late, is too much, too soon, by which I mean getting right into full practice exam papers, or even just topic-based past paper questions, like too early, before you've gone back over stuff. Now, when you're doing topic tests, I don't know, you've just done a topic on amines, you're about to have a test on amines, then of course you need to do exam-based questions on amines, because otherwise you're not going to know what they're going to ask. But if it's been 3 months since you did the amines topic and you haven't looked at it since, that's not the first thing you're going to do, is go back to a load of past paper questions on that topic, because it's too much for your brain that probably hasn't remembered all of that, because, you know, it's not that interesting. So you're not likely to retain it unless you've been one of these amazing students that has continually kept up consolidation. If not, work on it today. We're gonna start working on it. Other thing I just said, the problem is if you then decide, okay, I am going to look at A-means, one of the other issues now when we're at the end of our A-levels is we're still focusing on individual topics. So like, right, I'm going to do alkenes on Tuesday. I'm going to cover that. And then I'm going to move on and I'm going to do alcohols on Thursday. And then next week, I'm going to look at carboxylic acids. It's okay. We do have to cover them all, and there are a lot of them. So it's a good way to organize some of your revision, but not all of it. Because as you might have noticed, it isn't really like you get one exam question on one functional group. That's not how it works. That's not how it's going to work when you get a big page with boxes everywhere and lots of different functional groups. So that is helpful at the beginning when we've only done a few functional groups, but now you've covered them all, which I'm assuming you probably have by now. You need to find ways to link them more. And we'll look at that with the retrieval practice prompts that we could use. And then the other thing, so is taking mental shortcuts. So many students to me say, yeah, I use flashcards all the time. I am constantly using flashcards. By which they mean they have their flashcard and they have a question and they read the question or the prompt on the front of the flashcard and they put it down for a moment and they think in their head and they go, right, yeah, no, I know the answer. And they turn it around and they go, oh, I was right. I did know the answer. Cool. Okay. That's not testing yourself. In the exam, nobody is going to ask you to just think it through in your head and then move on. So if you're not writing, you're not really revising, or drawing or sketching or something. If you haven't got some way of putting a pen or a pencil or a stylus to a screen or a piece of paper, or even better, a whiteboard, so that we don't waste so much paper when we're doing it, you are not really revising. That's just it. You're just not, because you're not actually trying to get it out of your head. Okay, and the most important thing for memory is involving your working memory, not your short-term memory, but your working memory, so that you process things. And if you don't pick up a pen or a pencil, you're not processing anything, and your brain will trick you and you will think that you remembered the answer when you turn over the flashcard. You will think that what you said in your head is what it says on the card, because your brain wants to take an easy way out. And if you do that, you are just, it's better than doing nothing, absolutely, but it's not as effective as actually forcing yourself to do it from memory, write it down and then check it, so that you can see that whether what you wrote is what you should have said. So that is should be about 80% of your organic revision is just that, because someone said at the start, God, it really just feels like remembering a lot of stuff. Yes, it is. It is remembering a lot of stuff. It's making links as well, but the remembering is a key part of the revision. So for organic chemistry, you need to be doing retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is really common and popular these days amongst teachers. So I'm hoping that some of you have heard of the phrase. You've probably done it even though you might not have used it. So do any of you know, like, why are we saying retrieval practice, and how is that different to just going on Physics and Maths Tutor and downloading a pack of questions about organic chemistry and answering those questions, or going on a website with multiple choice practice questions? So yeah, how is retrieval different to doing practice questions? Ooh, fancy answer already, talking about short-term memory to long-term. Absolutely. So there's things about it. Multiple times, yes. Although you could do past paper questions multiple times. Converting short-term memory to long-term, and it isn't about the exam style, absolutely. So the key to getting stuff into your brain is how many times you try to pull it out, not how many times you try to shove it in. And so retrieval practice is bringing information back to your mind. That is it. So it can just be very, very simply a piece of paper where you try to write down everything you can remember about alkenes, for example. That is retrieval practice. It requires no subscriptions, no fancy flashcards, nothing. You just do that and then you check back in your notes. So it's about just bringing the information back. And it's not about how to do the exam question. That's a different skill. That's why I've got a separate class tomorrow to look at exam questions. So it's not looking at how you apply the knowledge. It's only part of it. Obviously, you do need to be able to apply it too. But there is no point in doing a complicated question with multiple synthetic roots and maybe a bit of analysis if you just have a hard time remembering different functional groups, or if you just can't remember a particular mechanism. There's no point doing an exam question where the mechanism looks a bit different if you don't know the original mechanism, if you can't do the basic ones. Okay, so retrieval practice, how to do it well, random, different things every day, preferably not all the same functional group all the time. So some of the questions that I've given you in that very short little workbook, if you haven't got that in your, then check your like spam or whatever folders in your email, because it was sent from my sort of main email address. But have a look and see if you've got your practice booklet, because that has a lot of sort of questions on a theme, but they are random for different functional groups. And little and often. So it doesn't work well if you leave it all to the last minute and do loads. It works well all the time, lots and lots of small amounts and low stakes. So meaning that we need to do it when we're relaxed-ish, as relaxed as we can be when we're doing chemistry, and not, so it's very different to when we're doing something under exam conditions, timed, where we're really concentrating on exam technique at that point. So low stakes can be misinterpreted because we said that one of the other issues was taking shortcuts. So we want to do random, we want to do little and often, we want to keep doing things like getting a piece of paper, dumping it all down on a piece of paper. Low stakes doesn't mean easy. So it doesn't mean answer questions I know the answer to. That's not retrieval practice. If you could retrieve it easily, you don't need to keep retrieving it. And apart from maybe in a month's time when you've forgotten it again. So we don't want to make it easy. And the sort of less prompts you have, the better. So blank pieces of paper or blank whiteboards are excellent, but they might be a bit scary at the start. So maybe do some other things. So some of the ones I've given are things where we use post-it notes to cover up a piece of A4. You can make your own piece of A4, divide it into 6, and then post-it notes cover 6 squares on a piece of A4 paper really nicely. They're a really simple way to just cover something up. Very classic, primary school. How did you learn spellings? You look, you cover, you write, you check. It's basic, but it works. If it works for primary school children in spellings, it works for A-level students and mechanisms and reaction conditions and things like that. But you have to, when we say it's look, it's cover, it's write. It's not look, cover, have a think you know the answer and then check. It's write and then check whether what you've written is correct. So we don't want to make it easy. You have to get used to getting it wrong. So if you're not getting it wrong, you're not really doing retrieval practice very well, because you're either cheating and thinking you're getting everything right, or you're a genius, we'll call that option C, or you are just testing yourself on the easy stuff and not testing yourself on hard enough stuff. So if you're constantly getting it right, put it to one side, leave it for a month and come back to it just in case, because you may forget it again. If you're constantly getting it wrong, you probably need to see a teacher, watch a video, do something about it. But if you are getting it wrong, you just make a note to keep going over that one more often. So if it's flashcards, you have 3 piles. You have, I get this right all the time, I get this right some of the time, and I get this right none of the time. You prioritize the ones that you're getting wrong all the time so that you just have more practice times to do them. So it's an active process. Okay, let's apply this a little bit more to organic chemistry. So you've got a booklet which has ways of, another one that I've given you is like a table where you can fold it up, or you can cover half the page. You can read half of the questions, answer them, and then check afterwards. All these little ways of doing things, they are going to add up. They're going to feel at the start like they're not, because they're difficult, but remember, because it feels difficult, that means it is working. Okay, if you're getting stuff wrong, that's okay. It's memorable when you get stuff wrong. Okay, so what about this guy? This is not every single organic reaction in A-level. It's just the ones that don't involve benzene and aromatic compounds. There's a couple of differences between exam boards, but not a lot. So this is sort of, something that may be familiar to you. Either seen it in a book, maybe you've written it all out yourself already, maybe you've already got a poster of it on your wall if you're super organized. So it's a great summary. It's a great way to stop looking at individual functional groups and to look at the whole lot. And looking and covering and writing and checking is a great thing to do with this, but it's pretty overwhelming if I was to say to you, let's write out this whole thing with all the annotations on all the areas at once. So instead, we can focus on different things that we might be asked about all of these reaction pathways. So I could have a blank page of this, or I could use it on a screen, and I could go, right, well, let's just start with something easy. Can I actually draw all of these functional groups? Some of them hopefully will be second nature. Maybe when I get to a 2-hydroxynitrile, I might have to think about it and go back and look for what that is. So can I do all of those? The next thing I would do, an obvious thing, of course, that I need to know is reagents, conditions. Does it need reflux? Does it need distillation? Does it need a different solvent? Does it need a catalyst? And then what is it that I'm actually changing in between each one? So what type of reagent do I need to add to go from an alkene to an alcohol to an aldehyde? So separate them, because if you try and do all of it, you're never going to remember it. And if you only ever try to remember individual reactions, then you don't get the whole picture. And so you're not looking at some similarities between, like, sometimes I might use the same reagent in 2 different reactions. Then we need to look at type of reaction. So that's why I gave a series of summary sheets in that little booklet to kind of go over the different types of reaction, because I think it's a neglected area where we sort of remember that there's mechanisms, but we don't remember there's all these other types of reaction, like condensation or reduction or oxidation. So that would be a case of simply, can I go around each of these arrows and name all of those types of reaction, so that when we get an exam question that asks us that, we can go back to this idea and try to remember which change that was. And of course, mechanisms. We don't need to know mechanisms for all of them. So it's just going to be some of them, depending on your exam board, which ones you need to know. And you can then, when you're feeling a bit more confident, start to take out middle stages and start to expand your testing your memory. And instead of going, how do I go from an alkene to an alcohol? Think about, how do I go from an alkene to an aldehyde? So you start to take out steps. Or how do I go from an alkane to a amine? So you're thinking individual steps, and that will really, really help with synthesis. The last thing you want to do is start doing past exam questions on synthesis until you've got these ideas sorted, because it's just going to be really overwhelming once you get those sort of big, long mark questions. So one way is looking at the whole scheme and just focusing on individual bits. Like, can I draw the functional groups? Can I do the reagents? Can I name the conditions? Conditions are just as important as reagents most of the time. Okay, so, and these, you can get these little skeletons from various different places, or you can draw out your own and then just have it as something which you just have as your basic map to go off. Okay, what about functional groups? Because another thing I said is don't just revise individual functional groups, but you do need to start making links with functional groups. So you do need to know quite a lot about some of these not so much. So what else can we do? So this is a selection of questions we could ask about the overall maps of organic reactions. What about if I just wanted to look at the functional group? So I've chosen alcohols because there's lots to know. It's a really busy topic, lots and lots of information. So again, if we've got, and this could be on a piece of paper or a series of flashcards, a lot of questions that you can ask, which will just be basically retrieval practice questions that you can apply to any functional group. Some of them you won't have any answers to, but most of them you will. So for example, let's take alcohols. First thing, do we know how to name them? Do we know how to classify primary, secondary, tertiary? So that applies to lots of different functional groups like alcohols, amines, haloalkanes. Can I remember the difference? Can I draw them out? What do I do if there's two of them? So a diol, that kind of thing. Then we could look at, this is one that everyone forgets, are really surprised when the questions come up all the time in the organic papers. Forget about the chemical reactions. What are the physical properties of this group? Like, what are their boiling points like? What intermolecular forces do they have? So alcohols have hydrogen bonding, so I'd expect high boiling points. I'd expect them to be kind of soluble in water, depending on how long the alcohol is. Little things that we maybe forget to ask, but actually come up surprisingly often. We can ask what type of reactions. Now, obviously, this is the main question, but it's something we don't ask. We tend to just sort of like list the reactions without thinking about what it is that they're doing. So alcohols basically do oxidation, they do substitution reactions, and they do dehydration, depending. So there are already 3 different types of reaction. And then when we decided what type of reaction, we'll need to know what the reagents and the conditions are. So I've used a little screenshot of the map because it helpfully shows me the arrows away from the alcohols. So I know that I should be able to make about 4 other things from an alcohol. So one thing is, what can I make from an alcohol? That's a really useful question. And what do I need to do to make it? For that, can I write balanced equations for that? So not just knowing that if I start with this alcohol, I end up with a carboxylic acid, but how would I write an equation to do that? Most of these chemical reactions, we have to be able to write balanced equations for, and we tend to forget to practice that. Obviously, some of them are going to have mechanisms, not all of them. We don't need mechanisms for oxidation, but I might need it for dehydration, depending on your exam board. And then if there are mechanisms or anything else, do I need to worry about isomers in my products? So alkenes, addition for alkenes, sometimes you get a major and minor product. Sometimes you get optical isomers. Sometimes if you make an alkene, you will get EZ isomers. So, or are there alternative products? So if I oxidize a primary alcohol, I get a different product to if I oxidize secondary alcohol. So all of those questions simply came from, what type of reactions they have. So that's going out of the functional group. And that's where most people stop. Like, I've done all the reactions of alcohols. So, you know, I haven't stopped. I've got 10 questions about this functional group. The next one is, how do you go in towards the alcohol? So that's going to be a question that you can ask about every single functional group is, how do I make it? Not just what does it then do, but how do I make an alcohol from something else? Because those are the kind of synthesis questions you're going to get where you need to identify multiple reactions in one go. So you need to know how to get there as well as what alcohols can do. And then what chemical tests are there? Please don't lose marks on chemical tests. Please don't lose marks on we add this and it goes green. Those are just great marks to get. And we should be able to get them if we give ourselves enough time. It should just be fairly straightforward learning of that sort of stuff. And then to help us when we get to spec questions, start to think of each functional group. How would it look in infrared? What bonds would I see? What peaks would I expect to see? How would it look in NMR? Is there anything special? And in an alcohol, there's a really, really high chemical shift peak for the OH. And for an infrared, there's a really obvious. It won't be obvious for all of them, but for some, it's really helpful to do. And then how will it look in mass spec? That's not as easy because mass spec can be quite varied depending on the molecule. But for example, I would expect an alcohol to have a peak at 17 for the OH bit that comes off. So you can still make some predictions. And by asking all of these questions, instead of just going through the notes, because the notes are written and your class notes and the way that your textbook is organized, it's organized so that you can sort of do your alkanes, then do your alkenes, then do your alcohols, haloalkanes, then have a sort of end of year exam and then move on to the next organic bit. And then like in about 7 months time, you do spectra. So what the sort of textbook and whatever resources you're using from class don't do is they don't then sort of go back over and think, how does it link together with all the other parts of organic chemistry? And that's how you need to change your revision today. So if you're going to change 2 things, one is way, way, way more difficult retrieval practice where you're actually asking yourself questions and writing them down and checking, not just assuming. And 2 is asking yourself questions from all over the different areas of organic chemistry for all the different functional groups and how they join together. It's difficult, but you know, difficult is worth doing because it gets you results. So all we've done so far is done using things like flashcards, mind maps, bits of paper, just little quizzes. We haven't looked at all in this whole revision section. I've been 30 minutes and I've not mentioned anything about past paper questions or proper practice questions. But of course, you are going to want to use them because otherwise you're not going to be able to apply all the stuff that you've just learned and put together in a sort of exam style. So I have a question. So everyone here is doing different stuff. I've got people doing OCR, EdXL, AQA, got some people doing WJC, my commiserations. Is it okay to use different exam boards or to use older past paper questions? Is that something that you've been told to avoid? Would you ever even think of it, or would it be just a complete no? Because obviously you've got 5 years of past paper questions because it changed. 2017 was the first sort of A-level papers in your current, but no matter what board that you're doing. Brilliant. Yeah. So a lot of people saying yes to old stuff and maybe not so much to alternate boards. So that's quite interesting. And it's quite a common thing. So I would say there is the difference between old and new is about the same as the difference between, say, AQA and OCR. So what that means is there are opportunities for you to use questions from other places. So I have a document which I will send a link out to. It's amazing. I didn't make it myself. I will also send a link out just because I know that some teachers have signed up to this and I think they will find it really helpful too. You might find it a bit overwhelming and just be like, no, thank you, I'm not looking at that. But it's just to show you that actually, so AS just means it's taught in the first year normally, or taught as AS, and the AL just means it's taught in the second year, or it's included in the full A level. And then you've got the crosses mean that it's not taught at all. So there are crosses, but there are actually loads of things which are just common across all exam boards. So everything covers electrophilic addition to alkenes. And where there are crosses, it's often tiny things. So for example, like hydrogen with a nickel catalyst, that's never going to be more than 1 mark. It's just going to be, how do you get from here to here? You add hydrogen with a nickel catalyst. Like it's never going to be a lot. It's never going to be like a 6-mark question. And most of it is just like tiny individual reactions that you don't need to know. If I were to look at like the skills of organic chemistry, so rather than just what the reactions are, this is a comparison of, you know, what you need to know about different functional groups specifically. And you can see that pretty much everything is the same across all the examples. You all have to be able to draw those, learn those, name those, classify them primary, secondary, and tertiary. So actually, the differences between exam boards are not as big as you might think. Absolutely do not use entire past papers, because the structure of the papers is different. So that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to be using paper 2 from one exam board to practice paper 2 for a different exam board, because they're totally different structure. But if you just want topic-based questions and you feel like you're kind of running out or you want a change, then I don't think there's not really anything wrong with just downloading a pack of past paper questions about alcohols from any exam board. So if you find a really good website, it's not quite yours, it's not supposed to be for your exam board, do not worry about it. If you find a good video and you're not sure, oh, is this meant to be for my exam board? Most of the time, it'll work absolutely fine. And definitely to old papers too, because the other thing that happens is examiners get lazy and they go looking at other exam boards or at really old questions to help them write their new questions. And therefore, those questions that you get on the exam that everyone's like, oh, this is not like anything I've seen before, it's probably because they just cribbed it from some other exam board. So therefore, it's actually a good way to get yourself prepared. But when you use past paper questions, you are now practicing doing past papers, even if you're not doing the whole exam. So you need to be not looking at notes when you do this. It's not retrieval practice anymore. It's exam practice. You need to give yourself timed conditions and really sweat it out. If you're doing 50-mark pack of questions, you need to give yourself an hour and not look at your notes in that time and just try your best. That is why we don't do those questions until we've done the retrieval practice first. Because otherwise, all that's going to happen is you're going to completely lose heart and just give up, and you're not really then using them in the way that you should be. You're not really practicing them under real conditions, because you don't get to give up on the day. So, well, you could, I suppose, but seems like a bit of a waste. Okay. And when you're doing retrieval, I wasn't going to talk too much about this, but we're moving on to just how we plan our revision. So we know it's going to need a lot of retrieval practice. We've got some techniques that we can use. We need to be mixing it up so that we are looking at stuff that's recent, but also looking at stuff from a long time ago. When I just started organic synthesis with my year 13s, the main thing I noticed is they had just forgotten absolutely everything there was to know about alkanes and alkenes, because they hadn't been topping up their knowledge. And so that was stuff that they did well over a year ago, and they forgot it all. So we don't have that much time to constantly go back over stuff, but try to mix it up, which is where having a timetable is going to help. So having a timetable that says I'm going to cover these different areas is really important to our planning. So the good news is it's the 11th of April at the time that I'm recording this. And at that point, you've got 68 days until paper 2. 68 days is ages. It's more than 2 months. It may not seem like very long because, like, you know, you've gone through a lot more than 68 days of learning chemistry, but those days have been really busy. Like from September, your days have been super busy. You've had loads of assignments, loads of tests, loads of things going on, mock exams, etc. Now you are literally just preparing for your A levels. I'm hoping that none of you have any other sort of projects going on other than that, which means that you're going to have a lot more time to dedicate just to retrieval practice, revision, that kind of thing. So given that that is a reasonable length of time, we don't want to peak too soon. So this is only my suggestion. You do what you want, but this is my sort of, I find that if you've got a suggestion of a structure, sometimes it just helps you to take that step forward of planning your revision. So I would say that up until the end of this month, you've got to like at the whole week of Easter too, hopefully. About 40% of that time. By consolidation, I mean, I'm appreciating that you might not have your stuff in order to do retrieval practice. If you've sort of notes are a mess, or there's topics that you really actually have totally forgotten or don't understand and you need to go back over them, then that sort of needs to happen before you can start quizzing yourself and getting a piece of blank paper and writing stuff down. Because if it's all gone, then you need to properly go back over. And at only those times you're allowed to just read stuff and learn it without writing stuff down. But we should still be doing about 40% retrieval practice, which is absolutely forcing your brain to remember stuff, forcing yourself to write it down and check it. And then maybe 20% of the time on practice questions, because we want to do some. But try to keep the practice questions mixed, not whole exam papers. They are just a few, maybe textbook questions, for example, something simple that we've done before. And then up until end of May, then we really need to up the retrieval practice because we should have enough stuff now that we can actually just be relearning everything and then upping our practice questions. But they're still topic-based questions or maybe mixed topic-based. So the way that you can do mixed topic-based is simply just download a load of topic questions and say, I'm going to do, right, the first 3 pages of that one, and then like the first 3 pages of that one, and then just swap it around the next day so that you're not doing only the same topic all the time. And then when we get to sort of the last month, that is when, that's paper 3's date, by the way, not paper 2. Paper 2 is on the 20th. That is just working really now, just practice questions, past papers, practice questions, past papers. Obviously, that is the most important thing to be doing as you get closer to the exam. But if you're starting with that, you've got nowhere to go. One, you're going to get super bored. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to find the practice exam papers too difficult, mostly, unless you are genius, in which case you don't need to be here. So, assuming you're not a genius, you're probably also going to want a weekly timetable and a daily timetable. So you may have like a sort of monthly planner kind of idea, but looking at your week at the beginning of the week, whenever you do it, maybe a Sunday night or something like that, and just looking at when your spaces are, especially now, maybe when you go back to school, looking at when you have free periods and actually allocating them to specific things. So allocating to subjects, that's your weekly timetable. So you just be like making sure that you spread out your subjects. And then your daily timetable would be, right, these are the 3 times that I'm looking at my different subjects today. I've got like I'm going to look at biology in the morning during my free, and then I'm going to look at like chemistry and maths in the afternoon when I get back. You can then allocate specific tasks that you're going to do. The more specific it is, the more likely you are to do it. And if you are procrastinating right now, that's common. But if you keep procrastinating, it's not going to make anything any better. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So just give yourself achievable things. Okay, so they have to be specific. They can't be like, oh, I'm just going to do biology for an hour, or I'm just going to do organic chemistry. Give yourself something specific. Go, right, I'm going to look at types of reaction, and I'm going to look at types of reaction, do some retrieval practice, and then maybe I'm going to do 20 minutes of practice multiple choice questions. So try to give yourself time limits. Notice I've used percentage. I haven't said how many hours, because that's your time. And also give yourself time rather than I will complete this many things. Just see, I will spend this much time on something, because time is the only thing you can control. You can't say how long it's going to take you to learn everything there is to know about alcohols, but you can say, I'm going to spend this much time on them, and then you will achieve your goals. Don't be overambitious. I say, being the most overambitious person I know for to-do lists and things like that. So I'm still working on it. So it's no doubt that you will find it tricky as well. But that's why we have the weekly and the daily timetable, because if you've got an idea of what you're going to do in the week and you get to Wednesday and it's all going completely wrong, then you change it and go, okay, this isn't feasible. I'm going to change my timetable. This isn't working. Think about when you work well as well. Some people it's morning, some people it's evening. Still need to sleep. Sleep is as important as retrieval practice for exam success. So that's like three things: retrieval practice, practice questions, and good sleep are very, very important. Impressively, despite my overambition, I have actually got through this on time, which is rare. Which means I was probably speaking quite fast. So I'm going to allow any questions you have about anything I've said, and I will have a go over them. Oh, what a great question. I definitely agree. So is it okay to be doing the AS papers now and the old papers and then leaving the A-level papers later? So I would say absolutely yes to the AS papers. AS papers are a good thing to be doing now, assuming you have done some consolidation, because otherwise, if you've not caught up, presumably you have, because you've probably had mocks and things like that to make you go back over them. But if you are as hazy as some of my students are about, you know, the reactions of alkanes or the reactions of halogens, then maybe you do need to do that retrieval practice before you go into an AS paper. But AS papers are a very good sort of midpoint. A question style in AS papers also does tend to be easier because it's less synoptic. It doesn't take as much stuff out as the rest of it. It doesn't take as much stuff into a question. And so, yes, that's really helpful. Another question, where can we find question banks? So if you've not, and I think some of you are newly signed up to my mailing list, I actually have a revision planner for A-level. Now, it started in March, but it doesn't really matter because it includes loads of links to different banks of practice questions and different websites where you can find them. So most people know about Physics and Maths Tutor, but there's a couple of other places out there that are pretty good. So what I will also do is send a link to that in an email as well, so you've got that. So that's past papers, and I'm going to send out the thing of the comparison of the different A levels, so you can see that's not just for organic, that's for every single topic in A level. It has a little that summary table that tells you what's in each A level, so you can see if there's something that you're not supposed to know, and then you can ignore it. So I'll send that out, and hopefully you've already got your little revision booklet. And tomorrow we're going to look really in depth more about actual exam techniques, so that when you do come to those doing those past paper questions, we can have some strategies to really, really help us avoid mistakes on those and avoid the overwhelm that you can get with the bigger organic questions. Any more questions? Those were very, very good ones. Cool. Okay, I will stop the recording there.